This is the story of Darian Ashworth and his mother Paulette Ashworth, and the house that was never quite his. There are families that love loudly, celebrations that fill entire neighborhoods, arguments that end in laughter, affection worn openly like something to be proud of. The Ashworths were not that kind of family. Their love was quiet, conditional, and distributed unevenly in the way that only those inside the house could ever truly measure. Darian had spent 31 years believing that the imbalance was something he'd imagined, a sensitivity problem, a failure of perspective on his part. He was the older child, the one who'd left at 18 and made something of himself. Or tried to, and in trying, had sent money home the way you sent letters you hope will explain who you are. What he had not understood, not fully, was that the house he helped pay for had already decided who mattered most inside it. The unraveling, when it came, was not loud. It arrived the way most truths do, quietly, while he was already standing in the middle of it. The drive from Portland took 6 hours, and Darian made it in early November, when the Oregon hills were the color of rust and the sky pressed down low and gray. He had packed 2 bags. He told himself it was temporary, 3 months at most, enough time to stabilize after the layoff. Enough time to find something new without burning through the last of his savings on rent. He had a plan. He always had a plan. The house on Cleaver Street looked the same from the outside. The porch still sagged on the left side, the paint on the shutters still peeling in the same curling strips it had been peeling in for a decade. His mother had always said she'd fix it. She never did. Some things became part of the character of a place. Darian had decided years ago. You stop seeing them. His father, Warren, answered the door. He was thinner than Darian remembered, and there was something careful in his expression. Not cold, but measured. The face of a man who had been briefed on something and was deciding how much of it to confirm. Good trip? His father asked. Long, Darian said. They shook hands the way they always had, a habit neither of them had ever questioned. Darian stepped inside and immediately heard the twins. He could hear them before he saw them. The particular frequency of 4-year-olds who have claimed a space completely. The shrieking and the running and the sound of small feet on hardwood floors. Noemi's boys, Marcus and Cole, came tearing around the corner from the hallway and stopped when they saw him, staring with the frank, unself-conscious appraisal only very young children attempt. That's your Uncle Darian, Warren said to them. Neither boy responded. They turned and ran back the way they'd come. Darian set his bag down in the entryway and looked around the living room. It was rearranged. The old couch was gone, replaced with something larger and sectional, a deep gray that filled nearly half the room. Noemi's photographs were on the walls now. The boys at the beach, the boys at Christmas, a formal portrait of Noemi and her husband Derek in matching white shirts, which was a thing people apparently still did. There was a single older photo of Darian somewhere near the top of the stairs, one from his college graduation, slightly askew, as if it had been moved recently and not quite returned to its original angle. His mother came in from the kitchen. Paulette Ashworth was 63 and moved through her house with the deliberate authority of someone who had spent decades making it clear that every room was hers. She was wiping her hands on a dish towel when she saw him, and she did something that wasn't quite a smile. You made it, she said. I made it. She hugged him briefly, a hug with a clear ending point. You look tired. I'm fine. You're thin. I'm fine, Mom. She turned back toward the kitchen and said over her shoulder. Dinner's at 6:30. Noemi and the boys are staying through the weekend. Darian picked up his bag and started toward the hallway. His old room was the second door on the left. He'd lived in it from birth to 18 and had slept in it during every visit home since. He knew the way without thinking. He turned the handle. The room was different. There were 2 small beds against opposite walls, each with cartoon-printed comforters. A low dresser covered in stickers. A plastic bin of toys. Drawings taped to the wall with blue painter's tape. The closet door was open, and inside it, where his old winter coat and the last few boxes of his things had always sat, there were now hanging children's clothes organized by color. He stood in the doorway for a moment, not moving. "Oh," his mother said from behind him. He hadn't heard her come down the hallway. "I meant to mention that. We gave your room to your sister's twins. You're grown, Darian. Take the couch." She said it the way you'd say the mail came or dinner's almost ready. No apology embedded in the sentence, no softening. He turned to look at her. She was already walking back to the kitchen. He stood there with his bag in his hand and the sound of the twins playing somewhere in the house, and the low, gray November light coming through the window of what had once been the only room in the world that was simply, entirely his. He didn't say anything. He wasn't sure there was anything to say that would mean what he needed it to mean. He closed the door. He walked back to the living room. He set his bag next to the sectional couch that belonged to everyone and to no one in particular, and he sat down and he looked out the window at the street he had grown up on. Temporary, he reminded himself. 3 months. He believed it, more or less, the way you believe things you know might not be true. The weekend was populated with noise and routine, and Darian moved through it like a man learning the layout of a house that used to be familiar. Noemi arrived Saturday morning with Derek and the twins and a casserole she'd made the night before, and the house reorganized itself around her presence the way it always had, subtly, entirely, as if the furniture itself were relieved she'd returned. Paulette laughed more when Noemi was in the room. Warren became animated in conversations about Derek's contracting work. The twins ran everywhere and were indulged in everything, and Darian watched this and tried to locate inside himself something other than the low, dull ache he kept identifying and setting aside. He was not a man who allowed himself extended self-pity. He built that discipline deliberately, over years, as a necessary counterweight to the kind of childhood where you learned early that needing things from people was a form of risk. You needed less. You hurt less. He'd applied this principle to work, to relationships, to the particular economy of his family's affection. But the house had a way of making the accounting difficult to ignore. On Saturday afternoon, while the twins napped and Noemi and his mother talked in the kitchen and Warren watched football in the bedroom, Darian went looking for the power strip he needed to charge his laptop. He tried the hall closet, then the small storage room at the end of the hallway that had always been used for miscellaneous household overflow, tax documents, insurance folders. The kind of paper life that accumulates in cardboard boxes. The storage room was unlocked and he found the power strip immediately. But on his way out, something on the shelf caught his eye. It was a bank statement, not fully tucked into its envelope. He wouldn't have looked twice, except that the account name was not his parents'. It was a joint account, Paulette Ashworth and Darian M. Ashworth, that he had no memory of ever opening. He picked it up. The statement was from 8 months ago. The account showed a balance of just over $4,000, and the deposit history showed regular monthly transfers in, each listed simply as Darian Household. He had been sending $300 a month for the past 11 years, ever since he got his first real job at 22 and his mother had asked, once, whether he could help with the mortgage when she and Warren had hit a difficult stretch. He had said yes and set up the transfer, and then, because this was the mechanism by which he managed things that were painful, he had simply stopped thinking about it. He had not known it was going into a joint account. He stood in the storage room for a long time, the statement in his hand, doing arithmetic. 11 years, $300 a month. He'd occasionally sent more at Christmas or when his mother mentioned a repair. He estimated conservatively that the total was somewhere close to $40,000. He put the statement back in the envelope. He placed it carefully back on the shelf in the position he'd found it. When he came out of the storage room, Noemi was in the hallway. "Find what you needed," she asked. "Power strip," he said, holding it up. She nodded and went back to the kitchen. Her ease in the house was total, native. She moved through it without calculation. That evening, after dinner, when the dishes were done and the twins had been bathed and put to bed in his old room, Darian sat on the sectional couch with his laptop open and his mother in the armchair across from him, watching a cooking program. He wanted to say something. He rotated through possible versions of the conversation, looking for an opening. Mom, he said. Ma. The joint account, the one you set up for the household transfers. A pause. Not a long one. What about it? I didn't know it was joint. I thought it was going directly to the mortgage. His mother unmuted the television. On screen, someone was folding pastry dough with unhurried expertise. It's been helping with various things, she said. The roof 2 years ago. Derek helped us find the contractor, but we covered most of it ourselves. There was something in the phrasing, we covered most of it ourselves, that Darian sat with for a moment. Right, he said. He looked back at his laptop. He felt suddenly and absurdly the strange sensation of being observed, not by his mother, but by something larger, some invisible aperture through which the scene was being watched. He looked up from his screen, past his mother, past the cooking program, past the wall. I don't know, he said quietly. Maybe like the story or subscribe or something. His mother turned to look at him. What? He blinked. Nothing, sorry. I was nothing. She looked at him for a moment longer than felt comfortable, then turned back to her program. He closed his laptop. Outside, the November wind had picked up, and the old house answered it with its familiar creaks, the sounds it had always made, the sounds he'd mistaken, as a child, for the house being alive. He stayed 2 weeks before he started going through the documents properly. It was not a decision he made all at once. It was more like a door that kept presenting itself. In the storage room, in the oblique conversations with his mother about expenses and contributions and what the family had managed together. He had always been careful with money in a way his family interpreted as coldness. He tracked things, he kept records, and the more he sat with the arithmetic, the more it refused to resolve into something comfortable. On a Tuesday afternoon, when his mother was at her book club and Warren was at a physical therapy appointment, Darian went back into the storage room. He spent 2 hours in there. He was methodical and did not let himself feel anything until he was finished. What he found? 11 years of transfer records in a folder his mother had organized by year. The joint account, he now understood, had been opened the same month he'd started sending money. She had added his name to an existing account, not told him, and the money had pooled with funds that came and went for various household purposes. There was also a refinancing document from 6 years ago in which the monthly mortgage amount had decreased significantly, though the transfers from Darian had continued at the original rate, and there was a will amendment from 2 years prior, handwritten in a way that suggested it had been updated privately, which Darian knew had no legal standing but which communicated something clearly enough. The house, in his mother's intentions, would pass to Noemi. The amendment listed reasons and the kind of careful language people use when they are trying to be fair while being something other than fair. Noemi has been present. Noemi has provided care. Noemi's children will need stability. Darian sat on the floor of the storage room with the documents on his lap. His mother's reasoning was not incomprehensible. Noemi had been physically present. She lived 40 minutes away. She came for dinners. She helped when Warren had his knee surgery 2 years ago. Darian had been in Portland, and before that Dallas, and before that Chicago. He had been building a life at the cost of proximity, and proximity, it turned out, was the currency that mattered most in this accounting. The money was secondary in his mother's framework. The money was something she'd needed and accepted and incorporated without it changing the fundamental ledger. He understood it. He did not find it acceptable. When his mother came home, he was in the living room. He had made coffee, not as a gesture, just because he needed to do something with his hands. She set down her purse and looked at him and seemed to understand from something in the quality of his stillness that they were going to have a conversation she had been postponing. I went through the storage room, he said. She sat down across from him. She didn't ask him not to have done it. That, in its way, was the most honest thing she'd done since he arrived. I know what I've contributed, he said. And I know what the plan is for the house. Darian, I'm not asking you to change the plan. His voice was level. He had made a decision, somewhere in the storage room, to stay in that register. I want to understand something. All those years, did it not feel like I don't know? Like something was owed? An explanation? Paulette was quiet for a moment. She looked at her hands. You were always fine, she said finally. You've always managed. Noemi needed more. I needed more too, he said. I just never said so. She looked up. And I understand, he continued. That's on me. I know I'm not easy. I know I left and built a life somewhere else, and I was not here in the ways that counted to you. I understand all of that. He paused. But the money is a fact, and I'd like it acknowledged as a fact. His mother sat very still. She was not a woman who apologized easily. She was a woman who justified, reframed, redirected. He watched her do all three in the space of the next few minutes, and he listened, and he did not argue. When she finished, she looked at him with something that was not quite remorse but was adjacent to it. The look of someone who has arrived at the edge of an admission and is deciding whether the terrain on the other side is survivable. I don't know what you want me to say, she told him. I know, Darian said. I'm not sure I know either. He drank his coffee. She sat across from him. The house settled around them. He found a job in February, remote work, a mid-level analyst position at a logistics company headquartered in Atlanta, which meant he could technically work from anywhere. He worked from the sectional couch for 3 weeks while he looked for apartments in Portland, then found a one-bedroom in a neighborhood he liked, signed the lease in March, and began making arrangements to leave. His mother's response to this was complicated. She did not express relief, which surprised him. She did not express sadness, exactly, though something shifted in her manner during those last weeks. A quality of attention, as if she were studying him more carefully than she had in years. She cooked dinners he liked. She asked questions about the new job with genuine interest. He answered them. They were, in some ways, more honest with each other in those 6 weeks than they had been in the previous 6 years. Noemi came for a weekend in late February. She and Darian had not discussed the documents, and he had not introduced the subject. It was not a conversation he wanted to have with Noemi, who had her own relationship to their parents' favoritism and her own set of justifications and wounds. She had benefited from a structure she had not designed. He did not blame her for existing inside it. But on Sunday afternoon, while Derek took the twins to the park and their mother was resting, Noemi found him in the kitchen and sat across from him with the careful posture of someone preparing to say something she'd rehearsed. I know things have been strange, she said. Some things, he agreed. I want you to know. She stopped, recalibrated. I didn't know about the account, not the details of it. I knew you'd been helping with the house for years, but I didn't know, Noemi, how much it actually was. It doesn't change what you knew or didn't know, he said. It's not your fault. That's not the same as it being fine. No, he said, it's not. They sat with that for a while. Outside, a neighbor's dog was barking at something in the distance. The kitchen smelled like the coffee his mother had made that morning, still faintly present in the air. Are you going to do something about it? Noemi asked. I've already talked to an attorney, he said. I'm not going to contest the will or anything dramatic, but I've sent Mom a letter through the attorney, documenting the contributions and asking for an acknowledgement in writing that they constituted a financial stake in the property, not a legal claim, just an acknowledgement. Noemi absorbed this. How did she take it? She hasn't responded yet. She won't like it. I know. He looked at his sister. But I need it to exist somewhere, on paper. Something that says I was here, that what I gave was real. Noemi was quiet for a long time. Then she said, You were here, Darian. I know that. It was the most straightforward thing she'd ever said to him, and he was surprised to find that it helped. Not everything, not all the way down, but something. In the weeks after that conversation, Darian noticed something shifting inside himself, a gradual loosening of the posture he'd maintained since arriving, the particular rigidity of someone braced for impact. He hadn't realized how completely he'd been bracing until he began, slowly, to let it ease. He called a friend in Portland, a man named Isaac who'd known him since college and who had the particular gift of saying true things without ceremony. They talked for 2 hours one evening while Darian walked the neighborhood, and at one point Isaac said, "You spent a long time waiting for that house to see you." Darian didn't respond immediately. "I know," he said finally. "You're done waiting?" "I think so," he said. Yeah. He wasn't sure if it was entirely true yet, but he knew he was walking in that direction. His last morning on Cleaver Street was a Thursday in late March, and the weather had turned. Finally, the gray had broken and the light came through pale and clean, the way it does in the Pacific Northwest when winter finally stops insisting on itself. He packed his car the night before. He had 2 bags, the same 2 he'd arrived with, plus a box of the few items he'd recovered from the storage room. Some books from childhood, a camera he'd forgotten he'd left there, a letter his grandmother had written him when he graduated college that he hadn't known his mother had kept. He found his mother in the kitchen. She was at the counter, and she turned when he came in, and her face held a particular expression he didn't have a clear name for. A complicated stillness, the look of a woman who had made her choices and was living at the intersection of them. He'd received 3 days earlier a response from her attorney. One paragraph, formal in its language, acknowledging that Darian Ashworth had made consistent financial contributions to the household property at Cleaver Street over an 11-year period, totaling an estimated $38,000, and that these contributions were recognized by the property owners. No apology, no emotional language. A fact, documented on paper, existing now in the world. It was less than he'd wanted. It was more than he'd had. "You're heading out," she said. "Yeah." She poured him coffee without asking. He accepted it. They stood on opposite sides of the counter and he drank, and she watched him with that same complicated expression. "The job seems solid," she said. "It is. Good team. The work's interesting." She nodded. She smoothed the dish towel on the counter the way she always did when she was uncomfortable, straightening something that didn't need straightening. "Darian," she said. He waited. "I know I'm not always." She paused, started again. "I raised you to be capable. I expected a lot from you. Maybe I—" She stopped again. He didn't finish the sentence for her. He'd learned, years ago, that finishing his mother's difficult sentences was a way of taking the weight of them from her, and he had done it his whole life, and it had never helped either of them. She looked at the counter. "I know you needed things," she said finally. "I didn't always know how to. I'm not sure I—" She exhaled. "You deserved better handling." It wasn't an apology. It was as close to one as Paulette Ashworth had probably come in years, and he recognized it for what it was, a partial opening, a crack in the wall, offered and withdrawn in the same breath. He felt something in his chest that was not anger. It had been anger once, but it had metabolized into something quieter, a kind of understanding that didn't require the situation to be different than it was. His mother was who she was. She had always been who she was. He had spent decades trying to earn his way into a different version of her love, and that effort had cost him things, a particular lightness, a willingness to need, years of sending money to a house he was being slowly written out of. But he was not destroyed by this. That felt important. He was standing in the kitchen of his childhood home on a clear March morning, and he was intact, and he was leaving, and he knew where he was going. "I know, Mom," he said. He set the coffee cup in the sink. He picked up his jacket from the chair. She followed him to the door, which she hadn't done when he'd left for college, or when he'd left for Dallas, or any of the leaving befores. She stood in the doorway while he loaded the last box into his car. He closed the trunk. He turned back and looked at the house, the sagging porch, the peeling paint on the shutters, the window of the room that had once been his. It was ordinary. It had always been ordinary. He had made it larger than it was because it had been the site of something that mattered, and now he was doing the slow, necessary work of returning it to its actual size. His mother raised her hand, not quite a wave, something between a wave and a held gesture, as if she were showing him she was still there. He raised his hand back. He got in the car. He drove to the end of Cleaver Street and turned, and did not look in the rearview mirror, not because it would have hurt to look, but because it would have been a way of waiting for something, and he was done with that now. The road opened ahead of him, ordinary and clear, and he drove, carrying what he had learned and leaving behind what he no longer needed to prove. The house grew small behind him. He let it.